Probably my all-time favourite video by the YouTube channel Computerphile is a video titled Rabbits, Faces and Hyperspaces, wherein Robert Miles inadvertently and mathematically disproves the nonsense feminist notion of sexist representations in video games. I'd highly suggest watching the video yourself, but as a recap, we understand, categorize and group things based on their various features. Once you have a set of features you want to categorize things by, you can effectively build a feature space and see how certain subjects are grouped based on these similar or differing features. If you're a regular viewer of mine, you're probably aware that I have a bit of an interest in machine learning systems. Not just because AI is cool in its own right, but because when you're trying to design a machine learning system from scratch, you have to go right back to the drawing board and ask some very fundamental questions about the nature of intelligence itself. How do we understand the world? How do our human brains categorize things and then make choices based on those categorizations? To me, machine learning's insights into the human mind are as interesting as its real-world computing applications. For instance, say you wanted to teach a computer to differentiate between men and women. How would you go about doing that? For that matter, how do we differentiate between men and women? I mean, we can look at a very, very simplified drawing and instantly recognize that one of them is supposed to be male and the other one is female. It seems completely intuitive, but our very ability to do this means that there must be a consistent logic underlying that intuition. As a simple example, we could take a hypothetical group of men and women and build a two-dimensional feature space looking at hip-to-waist ratio and muscle mass. There'll be some slight overlap, but generally speaking, men have a higher muscle mass and women have a narrower hip-to-waist ratio. And when we plot them into the feature space, we can see a clear distinction between the two groups based on these features. From here, we can actually start considering the underlying logic of distinguishing men from women. Based on this feature space, we can look at the two groups and determine what the average man and woman looks like. And then we can start assessing people within that group. How far away from the male average is this person? In other words, how typically male are they? Are they big and burly, or are they more androgynous? We can basically draw a line through the two group averages to create a clear, quantified, measured spectrum of male to female based on these feature attributes. And this is where things get kind of interesting. We're often told that Bayonetta is the result of sexist female objectification, and Marcus Phoenix is a patriarchal power fantasy. In reality, both of these characters are the exact mathematical outcome that you would logically expect when you exaggerate characters along this vector within the feature space. As you progress along this line in both directions past the point at which normal humans exist, what you end up with is effectively a caricature based on the exaggerated features that differentiate men and women along this gendered spectrum. In the case of Bayonetta, this is uncharacteristically long legs, big boobs, and a narrow hip-to-waist ratio. In the case of Marcus Phoenix, that is a huge, bulky stature with oversized hands and bicep muscles and a head that resembles a cinder block. This isn't sexism. This is just the mathematical outcome that you would logically expect from exaggerated caricatures based on the features that actually differentiate real men from real women in the real world. There are real, biological reasons that underpin why exaggerated male and female characters turn out this way. And frankly, if their body types were reversed, our brains would recoil in shock because on a real visceral level, it just looks so wrong to us. In their original forms, they are recognizable. They're exaggerations, but they're exaggerations along a coherent spectrum. Reversing their body types, however, we know this is not what a woman is supposed to look like, and we know this is not what a man is supposed to look like. Now, hip-to-waist ratio and muscle mass are fairly obvious and easily measurable physical features. However, we seem to have a collective tendency to assume that biological differences as a result of evolution only exist below the neck. I've talked about this before in older videos. As a sexually dimorphic species, there are clear and obvious reasons why nobody, Not even the hardcore feminists want to see tennis become a mixed gender sport. But then everyone will look at games like chess and StarCraft and stand around scratching their heads, completely perplexed by the fact that there are almost no women at the upper echelons of these competitions. It was actually funny, a couple of people commented on that old video, pointing out that I'd focused on Toss Girl, but the top female-ranked StarCraft player at the time was Scarlet. Scarlet is a trans woman, meaning that she has an XY chromosome. It's really not that hard to work out. Like outwardly visible physical attributes, there are real quantifiable differences between male and female neurology and psychology. The problem is that behavioural motivations are much harder to quantify than hip to waist ratio. We know on a measurable, mathematical scale how men and women are expected to look, but how are they expected to behave? And as an even more abstract quandary, how do we expect society to collectively treat them?